What's up, sports fans? My name is Lucas Weiss, host of the Weesesports Chronicles podcast. We've made it. It's the end of 2020, and it's time for our year in review show on the podcast. I'm pleased to be joined by managing editor and CEO of 49 Sport Net, Ben Steiner, as we each break down our top 10 stories in a wild, unprecedented, and unforgettable 2020. I want to take this time to thank each of the listeners who have subscribed and watched and listened to my podcast all the way through. I've produced over 90 episodes, and what started as a quarantine project has now become a fixture in my sports content creation. I want to thank the guests who have volunteered their time out of their busy schedules to come chat with me about their careers, providing helpful advice to young journalists looking to break into the industry. I'm excited for what 2021 has in store. We have a lot of great ideas and guests. So make sure to like, rate, watch, and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Happy New Year. Without further ado, let's get to the Year in Review show with Ben Steiner on the Weesports Chronicles podcast. All right, as I said off the top, it is our Year in Review show on the Weesports Chronicles podcast. And what better way to bring back Ben Steiner for not his first time, not his second time, but his third time on the podcast. Ben Steiner, welcome back, my friend.
Definitely happy to be back, and it's been a wild year, so I'm looking forward to counting down some of the best moments from the year.
Yeah, and I mean, wild is certainly one way to put it. Unprecedented, I feel like I've heard that phrase used a jillion times to describe it. But again, thank you for coming back, Ben, to the pod. If you have not already heard Ben, episode 2 was the first time Ben was on. We talked a lot about how Ben got in this industry. He's one of the leading voices of U Sports coverage. Episode 41, he was on a round table with Justin Levine, Puck Authority, as well as Josh Kim. And Ben, I feel like I have to say this off the top before we get in the top 10. You're a top 30 under 30 for Canadian media. So, that's a cool thing. Congratulations.
Thanks so much. I was really not expecting that. I mean, their podcast fairly regularly because I'm interested in sort of Canadian sports media and sort of what their podcast always talks about. And I was listening to the podcast and I heard my name. I just totally threw my off. One of my colleagues at Between the Sticks, a soccer website I write for, Alex Gronge-Ruzik, he was on the list last year. And we were sort of joking last year that he does a bunch of national soccer stuff, and I was really not expecting to make that list, but thank you very much. And I mean, it's an honor to be on that list. I mean, you see some of the other names. I don't really think of myself in that same regard.
No, Ben, if anyone knows Ben, he grinds, and he's, as I said, one of the leading voices of U Sports. And here's hoping, Ben, U Sports in 2021. Let's hope we get back to that, when it's safe to do so. But before we get into, Ben, the top 10 moments of the year, look, COVID-19, I feel like, defines this year. I mean, and I look back to March 11th, 2020. Rudy Gobert tests positive for the coronavirus. The NBA shuts down its season. And I think, I don't know if you'd agree with me, but I feel like that moment made the world pay attention. And got people saying, okay, this is no joke. It's serious, and our whole way of life really began to change from that moment, and the sports world certainly did.
I think not only the sports world changed at that moment, but everything changed. The next morning, I didn't have class the next morning.
Yeah.
When Rudy Gobert tested positive and the game was called off, I was at a bar with a few friends after class. Can you imagine being at a bar with a few friends right now?
No.
It's insane. You don't think of that as a possibility. There was no regard for masks. There was no distancing whatsoever. It's crazy how it all changed within 24 hours. I think we can all sort of remember that week. The World Health Organization came out and they declared it a pandemic, and we didn't really know what that meant to a lot of people. And then no masks, then masks became political. And then sports went on hold for 2 weeks, and then a month, and then indefinitely. And then they came back, and then they left again. It's been weird, but you can look back to that week of March 11th to March 18th or so, and just everything changed so quickly. It was so hard to get a sense of what the world was going to be, or what was even happening, or what you were supposed to do. So everybody seemingly stayed inside, and we're just terrified of this potential virus. And now I think we're looking at the virus is everywhere, and people don't have that same level of scaredness. And so that's why we can't get out of it as fast as maybe we could.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, and I totally agree. I was in Florida. My journalism program at Centennial did a week in spring training, and like, I mean, we all know Florida. It's now a big joke. You know, it's the brunt of many jokes in terms of their COVID-19 response. But yeah, no, it certainly was surreal, and I think it certainly laid the foundation for a lot of events to happen throughout the course of the year. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the top 10 moments of 2020 because there are still stories. There are still moments that occurred in the sporting world in 2020. So before we get to your number 10, Ben, what was your criteria when you look at sort of ranking the top 10 moments of the year in 2020?
So it might not be a top 10 that you would see in the New York Post or the New York Times or somewhere like that, where those would count down. Okay, you have Patrick Mahomes dominate the Super Bowl and win that one with a crowd in February before everything came down. Then you have all the bubble stuff, and sure, that's something. But I think there's something to a lot of the smaller sports as well.
Yeah.
And how smaller sports who you wouldn't expect to get through the pandemic somehow have figured it out. So I think once we get into my list, that sort of is reflected in that. But I also think there's some things that you just can't forget and you can't not recognize, and those are definitely in my list as well.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree. I mean, don't accuse me of being, working for the New York Post and New York Times, because I do have some of those moments in my list, but I also think, too, that there are moments, I think, off the field of play that certainly intersected with sports that I certainly paid close attention to as well. And I think more than any other year in 2020, I mean, that certainly, those intersections, I think, were transcended what happened on the field. So that will certainly be in the consideration. So, Ben, without further ado, what's your number 10?
My number 10 would actually bring us right into the middle of quarantine, and it's going to be The Last Dance, the Netflix special about Michael Jordan and that legendary Chicago Bulls team. The Last Dance really unified everybody. When everyone was really following the COVID rules and everyone was inside, there was nothing to watch. I mean, we all watched Tiger King at one point. That was back in March. I think we all probably watched one of the pandemic movies, whether it be Contagion or Pandemic or something like that. Everybody went through phases, but even non-basketball fans watch The Last Dance because Michael Jordan is a cultural icon. He's not just a basketball player. And so I think that was a unifying factor. And so one of my top 10 sports moments is actually about sports 30 years ago.
Yeah, look, that documentary certainly is one of the best documentaries that I've ever seen. I think, the way it was shot, the amount of people that they got for the documentary, the fact that it's been footage that's been, there for so long, but it took so long to get approved for Michael Jordan and whatnot. And look, every Sunday night to be able to interact with social media about a documentary, it felt a little surreal. I mean, back in those, that the lockdown, the first quarantine phase, back when this podcast was called the Weesports Chronicles, not just the Weesports Chronicles, I think it certainly was a great moment for sure to see just, an absolute athletic icon and some of the memorable moments. And it's become a lot of memes, Ben. I mean, like, I took that personally. Like that meme has become, big. The whole Dennis Rodman, facial or, thing or, using his hands. That's also become a thing. So I think we're going to talk about The Last Dance for many years to come, but beyond 2020.
I know for me, it took a little while to get actually into the show because I'm not the biggest basketball fan. I'm not exactly a basketball nerd. So I knew that the Chicago Bulls were this legendary team, but I didn't know sort of the minutia of it and all the details. And so at first, when I saw that there was this show, I didn't immediately get into it, but then everybody started watching it. People that don't like sports started watching it. And so I sort of figured, what else is there to do? And I watched it. And how could you not love the stories that were told throughout that? So I think that was pretty unbelievable.
So my number 10, and you're already going to see my Canadian bias shine through, was actually way back in January when Team Canada won the World Juniors. And, not every year I put when Canada wins gold at the World Juniors in this country, it's always a huge moment, and I get it's at the beginning of the year, so people may forget about it. But this was one of the memorable tournaments. Like, you look at Alexis Lafreniere dominating and finally showing why he was a deserved number one pick in the 2020 draft to the New York Rangers. You add the story of Barrett Hayton getting injured and then scoring a big goal in the gold medal game. And then the fact that Team Canada came back and had to overcome a deficit to their arch rival, the Russians, was also something that was truly remarkable. And you can't beat that goal from Akil Thomas, the LA Kings prospect, the game-winning goal it turned out to be to complete the comeback. And look, Alexis Lafreniere was the star of Team Canada, but, there were a lot of other players that certainly had an impact. And as we get into the World Juniors a year later, a lot of them are returning, like a Quentin Byfield, a Bowen Byram, Dylan Cousins, just to name a few. So that's my number 10 moment, the Team Canada winning at the World Juniors.
Yeah, I would think that would rank pretty high in me too. And I remember watching some of those games at Real Sports Bar in Toronto as well. So you just can't imagine watching sports and everybody jumping up and shouting. So just sort of recalling some of those memories sent shivers down my spine. But I don't know whether Team Canada won the gold medal or whether it was Team Camera that won the gold medal.
Oh, right.
The puck bounced off the camera and didn't give Canada a delay of game penalty. So it was definitely a weird game, a weird bounce, and the start to a weird year.
No kidding. So I'll jump in next with my number 9, and that's Lewis Hamilton. And Ben, you know me, I'm not maybe the biggest F1 guy, but you can't deny what Lewis Hamilton did this year. And Formula One was one of those sports, like we maybe mentioned off the top, that did occur, did come back and it's done pretty well throughout the pandemic. I think it's certainly got a new generation of fans to talk about it, to engage with it. I know it's become a lot more popular on social media as a result of the pandemic, but you can't deny the greatness of Lewis Hamilton. It just felt like every single time he went in the vehicle, he was on the track, he dominated. And I just think, look, in sports, we love, the underdog story. We love to see parity, but sometimes we love a dominant figure in a respective sport. So my number 9 is the athletic accomplishments of Lewis Hamilton, who I believe tied Michael Schumacher, and Michael Schumacher is an F1 legend. So the fact that he's considered to be one of the GOATs of the sport already, Lewis Hamilton, he's my number 9.
I think that's definitely a good choice for number 9. He's not on my list. I am sticking with a more European-based sport, and I am going to go with the English Premier League champions, Liverpool. They won 30-year title drought, and for all of my life, and I'm only 20, I've always thought of them as a very successful club, yet until winning the Europa League and then eventually the Champions League and now the Premier League, it had never really happened. And then, of course, there was worries that maybe the season got cancelled and they would have not gotten a chance to lift the Premier League trophy. So I think just seeing Liverpool win the title for the first time in my life was just pretty cool, because I've always thought of them as this successful club. And I don't really know what it changes in sort of the global landscape of world football, because Liverpool has already been this successful club. They won the Champions League before they won the Premier League. But I think it is just a validation to lifelong Liverpool fans, who many of whom have never seen their team win a title.
No, for sure. And I remember getting texts from Liverpool fans, in tears, just thinking about the significance of this moment. And you could sort of, it could sort of be analogous to, Ben, if the Leafs ever win a Stanley Cup, when the Chicago Cubs won the World Series after over 100-year drought. There are probably fans of Liverpool that grew up and, their life occurred and they never saw their team win. So to me, like the fact that, that occurred for that fan base, definitely well deserved. And I think it's just great for soccer because, look, we grew tired of the dominance of Real and Barca and those teams, that I think it's nice to have an EPL team back dominating that you can be proud of.
And I think people they have a thing for British soccer.
Yeah.
It feels more authentic, real. I think North America has an obsession with Britishness in general.
Yep.
Not necessarily a good thing, not necessarily a bad thing, but I mean, people love the Royals. You just look at what's on Netflix right now. You have The Crown, The Queen's Gambit, things that are British shows or based in Britain shows, but marketing off a U.S. audience. So clearly there's an obsession there, and I think with Liverpool finding themselves at the top of Europe and the top of the Premier League, it's something sort of just exciting for everybody who loves the Britishness that has sort of transcended the world.
And their song, You'll Never Walk Alone, is always a treasure to hear, and certainly gets my hair standing when it's like all in unison in their stadium. Ben, what's your number 8?
My number 8, we're going to stick a little more locally, and we're going to go the secret $1 million donation, secret deodorant $1 million donation to the Professional Women's Hockey Players Association, the PWHPA. You've never seen something like that go to women's hockey before. And the PWHPA, they don't really have any income. They survive solely off sponsorships and events. And of course, right now you can't have events. But not only did they start the year off with a bang with the Dream Gap Showcase Tour that was also sponsored by Secret, and there were games at Ryerson, there were games across the GTA that were packed with hockey fans because they knew that these were Olympic level elite players on the ice. And then just last month, there was the $1 million grant that Secret gave to the PWHPA that's really going to fund and keep alive the PWHPA and the dream of a suitable women's hockey league. And I think that's so important, especially considering that the NWHL is now making inroads into Canada.
Yeah, and look, to 2020 has been a year of promoting, supporting women's sports. It's really been at the forefront, I think, of what's made 2020 this year in sports, and that's just another example. And I hope that as we get into 2021 and life comes back to normal, that I think we can continue that momentum. From a donation like this and get more eyeballs on this. I mean, get more, people like yourself and Justin Levine and Haley Salvian at The Athletic to be writing about women's hockey. And I think if we can continue that momentum going forward, I think it'll be very great for the success of the PWHPA and the NWHL as well. My number 8, I'm actually sticking with women's sports. It is Naomi Osaka winning the U.S. Open, and I think for any tennis fans, she is an icon, both on and off the court. She of course rose to the tennis scene in 2018, winning the U.S. Open with a lot of controversy in that match with Serena Williams. We won't get into it here, but she definitely deservedly won the U.S. Open. Then she follows it up at the Australian Open in 2019 in a 3-set victory. And then she gets to number 1 in the world, and she then talks about how she began to struggle with fame and just, being at that position, the pressures and the expectations that come with it. Of course, she then doesn't win another Grand Slam the rest of 2019. 2020 doesn't have a great start to her season, and then the pandemic happens. But when the pandemic happened, and then, of course, the subsequent tragic murder of George Floyd, she actually went to Minneapolis, Ben, to walk in those protests. So there are people who, sometimes, when it comes to Black Lives Matter and those actions, do sometimes performative actions. She actually walked the walk. She actually traveled from California to Minneapolis to really raise awareness about these anti-Black racism issues. And then, of course, at the U.S. Open, she, wears a mask after every match, and on the mask is a name of someone that's been tragically murdered due to police brutality. And she also led the charge for tennis to take a day off after the Jacob Blake shooting, and that was during in August that led to all sports having a day of pause and whatnot. So it wasn't just what she did off the court. She was dominant on the court at that U.S. Open. Like, no one seemed to be at her level of tennis. She got back to her dominant self and was able to win a tight 3-setter against Victoria Azarenka. So she's the number one player in the world, deservedly so. She has 3 Grand Slams already in the span of basically 2 years. So she's my number 8 story, Naomi Osaka.
You actually took that one right out of my mouth. I was going to say Naomi Osaka for not necessarily this one coming up, but maybe even higher up the list. But one of the things I think I do want to mention, and this will actually be my number 8 moment, or number 7 moment, I think we're at, is the pause that sports took in August when human rights and human rights, being a human, took precedence over athletic ability. Mm-hmm. I think that's how you can put it. I mean, I'm always at a bit of a loss for words for exactly how to describe what happened. Like, sure, it was triggered by another tragic murder, but for once, being a human was more important than sports. And it always leaves me speechless when that was happening and when I think back to it. But just think, the NBA players boycotted the game. The NHL eventually did it. Basically all sports stopped for a couple days. CPL players, which we'll get into a bit later, Canadian Premier League, while they didn't stop play, every single player in the league wore a Black Lives Matter t-shirt and surrounded the field. And they stood silent for, I think it was 8 minutes, which is just unbelievable to me. The fact that being a human meant so much after sports seemed to objectify so many people.
Yeah, and I actually had that moment a bit higher, and I'll talk about it a bit later. But I think, we saw the conversations leading up to the NBA. I'll call it what it is, a wildcat strike. They basically just said, we're not going to play today. And you heard, Fred VanVleet from the Toronto Raptors basically say, like, I'm tired. I'm tired of having to come to this press conference, this media availability, and have to stand here and answer the same questions again about race. And this is what a lot of black athletes feel. And that took precedence over just athletic ability. And I think as media members and as people just in general who are consumers of sports, we look at these athletes, but they are human beings after all. And as much as they have, insane athletic ability that not many people possess, they also, have a lot of the same feelings, emotions that you and I do. And I think you rightfully said it. Putting, human existence, what it means, the essence of being human over athletic ability, I think, is very important. I think it made a lot of media people, the general public, think of these athletes in a different light, which I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I would definitely mention that higher up the list, but I think it worked well with your Naomi Osaka moment as well. So I figured I would mention it now.
Great job there, Ben. My number 7 is another tennis moment, and that was Rafael Nadal. Rafa once again dominating at the French Open. And look, this is one, like, there's death, there's taxes, and there's Rafa Nadal winning at the French Open. He's, truly, the king of clay just doesn't even, come close to describing. He has 13. Let me repeat that. 13 French Opens. And to think that he is still dominating the clay surface at his age in 2020 after not playing a lot of tennis. He was, in Spain. He talked very candidly again just about dealing with the pandemic, not being able to go out and enjoy life, really. And I think he was one of the few athletes that, to me, encapsulated what this 2020 year meant in sports. He basically said, like, this isn't normal. I'm not happy. You shouldn't be happy. And, like, basically saying, like, look, this is just not a normal time we're living in. And he said, like, I hope that my tennis can be a distraction for people going through a lot in 2020. And certainly he put on a spectacular performance, beating one of his arch rivals, Novak Djokovic, in the final in straight sets. He ties Roger Federer, Ben. Think about this. To have two players in the same era have 20 Grand Slams apiece just goes to show you how dominant Rafa has been in the tennis world. So he is my number 7 story for 2020.
I think that's a great number 7 story because I think so often, and we'll realize it when they retire, we don't realize what we're seeing in tennis.
Yeah.
With Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer. And I mean, you can throw Novak Djokovic in that conversation as well. It's insane what the tennis world is seeing right now. It's similar in the soccer world with Messi and Ronaldo. To have the debate of the best all time and to have those players playing at the same time, it's a treat you're never going to have again. So in every sport, a lot of that is coming to an end over the next 3 to 5 years. So enjoy while you can, because tennis, somebody's going to be on top, and there's not necessarily going to be that 1-2 punch that like we've seen for a long, long time.
No, and like the big 3 have been the narrative for tennis for quite some time, and like, I mean, already like there's rumor about Roger Federer in 2021, him handing up the sneakers. I like to think like so much of my tennis consumption career has been those 3 guys. It'll just be like surreal when they leave the game, because like they were ultimately probably one of the reasons why I got into following tennis so closely. Ben, let's go to number 6.
So for number 6, we just spoke about some older athletes, and I'm actually going to stick on one older athlete specifically, and that's Christine Sinclair.
Yep.
She became the all-time leading goal scorer in international soccer. I'm not talking women's international soccer, but international soccer as a whole. She scored 186 goals. She did so in front of a few fans in Texas in February. I remember watching that match in the back of a lecture hall. I can't imagine a full lecture hall. Can't imagine a live soccer match in front of fans in Texas. But yeah, I mean, it was just unbelievable that she's still going at it. She still was one of the top scorers in the NWSL this year with the Portland Thorns. And there's even talk that she might do another World Cup, another Olympic cycle. And she'll be 40 in that age range, but she's taken such good care of her body and has adjusted her game in such a way that she's still effective really in the twilight of her career, and she's still one of the best players out there. But one person I do want to give a bit of a mention to, you might not even know the name, but his name's Martins Dukers, and he's a luge athlete, and he has been one of the most dominant luge athletes over the last 10 years. He dominated the 2010 Olympics. He's always in the conversation whenever World Cup race it is, and he won the first couple races in this FIL luge season that just started. So he's been absolutely dominant, and I know it's not a sport that a lot of people necessarily follow, but Martins Dukers, to me, has to be one of the most successful athletes of the last 10 years, but many people won't know his name.
Well, wait, Ben, wait. When the 2022 Olympics come around, remember, these people become experts in luge. Like, remember that, right? Remember when people, they become experts in luge, like figure skating, bobsleigh, like that's when, people like become experts in those sports.
Oh yeah, I mean, you look at what comes around every 4 years. I don't think people realize that there's a podium every week in ski racing.
Yeah.
Cover ski racing. There was a podium this morning. Canada was on the podium twice this morning with Kevin Drury and Mariel Thompson. The day that we're recording this, there was a ski cross race in Arosa, Switzerland. People don't realize that these events exist outside of the 4 years. But of course, when 4 years comes around, everybody's the biggest ski fan, the biggest snowboard fan, the biggest curling fan even. It's nuts what happens every 4 years, and it's really the magic of the Olympic spirit and the magic of the Olympic Games. But I think people just sort of forget that this happens all year, every year.
Quickly before I go to my number 6, I mean, when you look at Christine Sinclair, like how, like she's been just, such a dominant figure in soccer, but I just think too, like when you look at the history of Canadian women's sports, like she's got to be up there as one of the best, and it's just like, to me, she does it in just a way that is so gracious, and just she's just such a role model. I think for so many young athletes, and it's just amazing, like you said. I mean, to be able to keep doing this at such a she's in the twilight of her career, to be still dominating is pretty remarkable.
I think there's really only 2 athletes who are in that same conversation, and it's Hayley Wickenheiser and Christine Sinclair, for what they've done for their respective sports. It's just unbelievable. And I think for women in sport, there's a whole lot of people who've really helped women in sport over the last 20, 30 years. But in terms of inspiring a nation, inspiring not only women, but I know I used to really look up to Christine Sinclair when I was playing competitive soccer, and when I wanted to begin finishing better, I know I looked at a lot of Christine Sinclair footage to adjust my finishing technique. And I mean, she's clinical finisher. So that's what I adopted when I was playing. It wasn't copying any Canadian men's player, because I mean, the only successful guy we've had until recently has been Atiba Hutchinson, and he's a central defender or essential defensive midfielder. So not too exciting in terms of the excitement factors that you see on the pitch. But Christine Sinclair, she was scoring every game for a while. So that was somebody I looked up to when I was playing.
So speaking of another soccer player, my number 6, Alphonso Davies, Fonzie. And look, I mean, the year that he had, one of the most impressive years any Canadian soccer player has ever had. And you know, really in the conversation with Christine Sinclair. And he's only 20 years old. I mean, when you look at the fact that he was featured in 33 games.
I think he really hit the mainstream.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You know, he finally hit the mainstream. 33 games with Bundesliga's Bayern Munich, winning, you know, the Bundesliga Champions League title. He earns 5 trophies this year. Went on a 23-game win streak, unbeaten for 32 matches. And look, he's also the Canadian Player of the Year for the second time in 3 years, the co-winner of the 2020 Lou Marsh Trophy. I mean, you can't, I mean, I know this is Canadian. I know I'm showing my bias here, but boy, it's not too far of a reach to say that Alphonso Davies is one of the best left backs in the world. And he is my number 6 story of 2020.
I think Alphonso Davies is definitely one of the best stories of 2020. I know I got into a bit of argument with you on this when the Lou Marsh Trophy was being awarded, but he should have won it outright. I mean, really, there should be 2 trophies. I think we can both agree on that. I know we haven't discussed that there should be 2 trophies, but I really do think that if you play 3 games in a year, you should not be in the conversation to win an Athlete of the Year award. So I think the Lou Marsh should stay for athletic achievement, and then maybe a charitable achievement or something sort of like that, to recognize people like Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, who definitely needed something to recognize what he's done. But I don't think a tie in the Lou Marsh is necessarily the one. What disappoints me is the voting in the Lou Marsh was 18-18 and 1, and that 1 went to Jamal Murray. I don't know who voted for that, but I would have much preferred somebody just pick a side, because for somebody who's more of a soccer fan, soccer reporter than a football fan, it still felt like a loss to see Alphonso Davies tie for the Lou Marsh. It didn't feel like a win. It didn't feel like a harmonious sort of thing. It still felt like a loss because he was so dominant. He had the most successful year that any soccer player in the world could have, and it wasn't good enough to earn all the eyes in the room. It should have been unanimous Alphonso Davies. But just because you can't watch his games every week means he didn't win.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a fair point. I think the criteria is certainly very vague. I mean, it's very open-ended, and I think the fact that it is, I mean, you've seen winners in the past. I mean, you've seen Terry Fox win the Lou Marsh. You've seen Rick Hansen win the Lou Marsh. I mean, they're all so. I mean, I think what I'll say is, like, while I agree, like, you know, for the both, and like I think like your point about having like a separate trophy, I think would actually be pretty good, because I think, especially after 2020, I think we need to recognize humanitarian efforts of athletes who are Canadian. I think the fact that it did like the voting went that way, like it wasn't like, oh, we're gonna lobby, you know, this just for the sake of it. Like at least it did, you know, go that way in the voting. You know, who knows what happens behind the scenes, and I'm not here to like, you know, say what happens or question that, but it is something. It is a little poetic, Ben, that a draw, for to use a soccer phrase, were to happen there. But I digress.
it's a draw. I'm sure you can draw whatever parallels you want to the game of soccer, but Alphonso Davies is a game changer, and
Yeah.
he makes sure the games don't end in draws. He makes sure they end in wins. So he's going to have a long career. He's only 20 years old. He's an exciting player. He's going to have many more years like this, especially at a club like Bayern, who will spend through the roof to make sure they have success around Davies. He's going to win the Lou Marsh, like, straight out multiple times throughout his career. I'm not worried about that, but I really do think that as a 19 and 20-year-old this year, he really should have won it over a guy who played 3 games.
Ben, number 5.
For number 5, I'm actually going to go with something that nobody in North America knows all that well. But I think it was one moment in an England versus South Africa cricket game near the end of a game that was earlier in the year. Ben Stokes, the British bowler, hit 3 straight wickets, and beat South Africa for the second consecutive time. It was a man of the match performance from the Englishman, and it was just unbelievable. I don't watch much cricket, but I was watching that match, and what he did in that match was unbelievable. And I think that when England sees success in cricket, whether it's cricket or soccer, one of their 2 main sports, the country goes wild. And so beating South Africa for a second consecutive time in the way that Ben Stokes made it happen, it's just unifying. And I think anytime you see a country unified, it has to be pretty high on the list.
Oh, for sure. And, you know, I'm going to be honest, I did not watch that moment, but I know how important, speaking to some of my friends, that, you know, cricket is. And is it true, Ben, that, like, there are matches that can last days, correct? Which is surreal for me. Like, when I think, like, baseball is too long or football is too long, well, wait, like, cricket can actually last days.
There's different versions of cricket. So test can last days. That's sort of the traditional cricket.
Yeah.
But there's also a 20-20 cricket, which is just 20 overs, which is a lot more doable. And when I used to play cricket, we played 20-20, and that was 3 to 4 hours. So still a long event, right? But it does not take days, and it's not all that too taxing.
So my number 5 is, you know, a little bit sad. It's all the sports deaths that occurred in 2020, and like, I think, like, you look at some of these names, it's like, wow, like a lot of people you know, left us, and of course, you know, probably near the top of the list is Kobe Bryant and his daughter Gigi, which happened early in the year, and I just think that yeah, I mean, you know, when, you know, it's sort of like March 11th, which we talked about earlier. We remember where we were at that moment. Like, I remember where I was when I found out the news. It was TMZ, and usually TMZ doesn't get this stuff wrong. So when they reported the death, I'm like, oh my goodness, like, is this actually real? And then Woj put out the tweet confirming it, and I remember, like, just like the misinformation from that moment, first of all. So it was a real lesson for any young journalists. Like, don't tweet out something as important as death unless you know 100% certain it's factual, because there was a lot of misinformation there. But yeah, I mean, you know, when you look at Kobe's death, I think of a lot in baseball: Tom Seaver, Joe Morgan, Bob Gibson, Diego Maradona recently. I mean, a lot of these figures were complicated. They weren't perfect, but they were human. And I think because of those human qualities, a lot of people resonated with them. And I think with Kobe, he was certainly having an act of his career that maybe could have been better than his actual basketball act. Like, he was promoting women's sports, he was promoting women basketball, the whole girl dad concept, and his filmmaking career. And it was just obviously a very sad moment for a city and the sporting community. So I just put all the deaths in sports. I mean, there's so many that have left us, and I think every year you should you know, put that in there. And for me, I know it's number 5 here, but I mean, like, you shouldn't put a ranking, but it's obviously something I should definitely mention, because boy, a lot of you know, important names left us.
Yeah, I mean, you speak about the 2 moments this year where you knew where you were. You knew where you were when Rudy Gobert tested positive, or was told he tested positive, and you knew where you were when Kobe died, and you knew where you were when Diego Maradona died. And in all of those moments, it's almost a intersection of where the year was at COVID-wise as well.
Yeah.
Because I remember with Kobe, I was actually at the CAA Center in Brampton, getting my notes organized for a Brampton Beast versus Kalamazoo Wings hockey game. And I was at a hockey game. I wasn't wearing a mask. There was communal food in the press box, like things you just wouldn't think of today. And that news started to come out, and a group chat of my friends started just blowing up. I was scrolling through Twitter. I got completely, the task at hand of covering the game just sort of faded into the background for 20 minutes or so, while I just completely got attached to what was happening. And it was just stunning to me. I mean, I'm not the biggest basketball fan. I never really looked up to Kobe, but it was, I know a lot of the, I don't know whether you call them memes or popularity things, was when you throw a piece of trash into the trash can, you say Kobe, stuff like that. That's something that has happened throughout high school, elementary school. Like, that's always been present in my life. And to think like this is the guy, and I mean, even if he wasn't a famed basketball player, just hearing about a dad and his daughter crashing and dying it's heartbreaking. And I mean, as somebody who has lost a parent, it is just, I can't imagine, but also can't imagine. It puts me in a weird place, considering what the rest of his family was going through, because I know everything changes. The entire dynamic changes. The entire life changes. And I know for a lot of people, it won't really sink in for a number of years. But I think I had a bit of a somewhat unique point of view on it, but it was just shocking to me. I'll leave it at that. It can bring me to tears thinking about that. And then, of course, the Rudy Gobert thing, you know where you were. And then, I was at a crowded bar, right? So when that was happening, again, you don't think of doing that now. And then with the Diego Maradona just a few weeks ago, I was sitting in my bedroom away from everybody. So you can sort of see where the world has gone in the year.
Yeah.
Just by where you were at those 3 moments.
No kidding. Ben, we're now heading into the Final Four. What is your number 4?
So my number 4 is the success of Canadian leagues this year. I'll start off with the Canadian Elite Basketball League. They successfully did a bubble in Niagara, and they got the season off the ground, and it wasn't even a completely closed bubble. Like, it was a little open. People could go for dinner, just be within what restrictions were in that local area. It was just unbelievable to see what was put into that tournament, what came out of that tournament, and where it sort of leaves Canadian basketball at now. I know we had a bunch of Canadian players who earned a name playing for the national team. You take a look at the Scrub Brothers. They came back to play for the Ottawa Blackjacks. Of course, they ran into a bit of transfer trouble midway through the tournament, and one of them had to pull out. But it was just unbelievable to see the amount of talent, all the way from Weesesports, which is something that's close to my heart, to international basketball stars dominating and playing in a Canadian Elite Basketball League. So I think that didn't get the recognition it needs, but they were one of the first people to pull off an actual successful bubble. They did it before the NBA did. So there's that.
Yeah, I mean, Canadian basketball has grown tremendously over the years. I mean, the Raptors winning a championship certainly, accelerated that growth. But, we can't forget about these leagues. And I think the CBL, did a phenomenal job. And the fact that it's getting partnership with CBC, and you're seeing a lot of people there, putting the work into telling these important Canadian stories, I think will serve the league well. And hopefully I know you and I have had conversations about this. I mean, this is just so critical to get these sports and these leagues the awareness that they deserve. My number 4 is the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl run. And again, that was back when the world was sort of quote-unquote normal. Way back in January and February. And I think the important context here is a couple years ago, so 2019, I was at the AFC Championship game in Kansas City when Patrick Mahomes played Tom Brady and the Patriots. And I think that was the moment where Mahomes had won the MVP of the season, and he played a heck of a game, but just lost in overtime to Tom Brady. But it really felt like that Mahomes was close to being this next superstar. He was sort of even though Brady won, it felt like sort of a passing of the torch, that this was probably going to be one of Tom Brady's last legitimate chances to win a Super Bowl, but here's the next quarterback in waiting in Patrick Mahomes. And when you look at last NFL season, Mahomes was hurt, and there were questions about whether or not the Chiefs could get back to that point, but once Mahomes got back, he showed that he was back. And when you look at that playoff run, they were down, I believe, by double digits in all 3 of those games, including the Super Bowl, down by 10 in the fourth quarter. And I'll never forget that throw by Mahomes to Tyreek Hill. And Mahomes wasn't having the best of games, but then that just turned it around. And you can just see how that offense operates, that once Mahomes gets going, they're just dominant. They're just so difficult to slow down. And the one thing I'll mention too is Andy Reid. I think this is someone that's been around the league for so long. He's, next to Belichick, has the most wins out of active head coaches in the NFL. He had a chance to win with the Philadelphia Eagles. That fell by the wayside. So for him to finally get the recognition he deserves as a Super Bowl champion was great. So that run to me, and the fact they hadn't won a Super Bowl since 1969 also was great. So a huge drought broken, and happy for those passionate Kansas City fans.
Yeah, I don't know how happy soccer fans are looking back at that game, seeing who won and Laurent Duvernay-Tardif winning that game, because if he didn't win that game, then Alphonso Davies would have won Blue Marsh.
Oh my goodness, man. Okay, you just jogged my memory, because now I'm gonna spend a few minutes talking about LDT. I mean, look, LDT, great. He has a contract extension. Like, for an offensive lineman, 6th round pick. Most of those guys are out of the league by then. So for him to have a contract extension, is huge. And the fact of the matter is, he actually played, a decent amount of games in 2019. I know it's considered the 2019 season, but like, it's at the end of the year. Like, I mean, he can't really control that. And then of course, what he did off the field, the fact that he's a doctor, and then going to the front lines in his home of Quebec and opting out of the season, and especially in a year that's been defined, as we've talked about in this podcast, about the COVID-19 pandemic. It certainly was very philanthropic and altruistic. So, yeah, I mean, a chance to talk about LDT, I'll do it. I'll do it every day of the week, Ben. But that's my number 4 story, the Kansas City Chiefs.
I definitely like that story, and I'll go to my number 3 story now.
Yep.
I think that's where we're at. Going through 20 moments, you lose track of it sometimes. But for me, I'm going to stick with another Canadian bubble, actually, and it's going to be the Canadian Premier League.
Yep.
The CEBL had their successful bubble, and then the Canadian Premier League, it was sort of up in the air what they were going to do. Nobody really knew what they were trying to do. The communication from the league was very scarce. Nothing wrong with it, but they were just not giving anybody any details. And then out of nowhere, the Island Games and a season tournament on Prince Edward Island in a bubble. And for a sophomore league like the CEPL, I did not expect them to be able to pull off a bubble tournament like they did. And they also debuted one of the very first, what's it called? Virtual stadiums, I guess it's called. And so, well, in other sports, we saw sports have fake fans. I know CBS did some fake fans at one point.
Yeah.
Or you saw just the tarps over the field or the digital tarps over the stands. They actually put a fake stadium over a university field in Prince Edward Island. And I think that was just unbelievable what the Canadian Premier League did. To have the season go ahead and have a season that wasn't just any season. It was a second season. It was a statement season. And it was an expansion season as well. And Atletico Ottawa has fans. They've never seen their team play.
Yeah, and like I called one of the York 9 games, or York United now it's called, for Saga 960 AM, and I think that, look, for a lot of those leagues, I mean, the pandemic threw sort of a wrench in their plans, because these are gate revenue driven leagues, and they need fans in the stands for them to be functional. But they just proved, like the CBL, we can do it, right? Like, we can have sports return safely amidst the pandemic. So I think those two leagues that you just mentioned, 4 and 3, certainly deserve a lot of credit in trying to navigate a very challenging, and I'll use this word again, unprecedented environment. And I thought they did a very good job, and we'll see what they do heading into 2021 and beyond.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. I mean, you brought up that York United, formerly York 9 FC, has undergone a rebrand this year. I think what they did to rebrand the club was magnificent. I think it's a lot better to do a rebrand like that than to announce that you're changing name, take a season under empty name basically, and then introduce a new name. I think just doing that very quickly with still thinking it out is the best idea. And I really think that the York United makes more sense because while York 9 was modern, it was hip, it was cool, every time that I mentioned York 9 to somebody, they would either say it's a dumb name or I would have to explain it to them and then they would sort of get it. But York United, it actually makes sense in this context. I know you and I talked about how so many North American teams will just slap United onto the end of their name and it's United or FC or Atletico in Ottawa or Athletic or just something sort of like that to make it seem very soccer and very American, or like an American version of a bastardized British soccer team. It doesn't work. But so you look at a team like Atlanta United, they just stuck United on the end of that. DC United did the same. But York United, it takes those 9 regions that were in the original name and unites them. It makes sense. It's the same thing that happened with Manchester United, where one club took over another, and then, of course, Manchester City popped up a few years after that, but they weren't going to change the name again. So this makes sense. I think, unfortunately, United has been sort of worn out. But one thing I didn't like from it is that they went to a new color scheme. And I think the sort of rave green Seattle Sounders-esque color scheme they had before was a little sharper and a little more fun. But I also like the heritage they're paying to Fort York and the military that were based in that area.
So my number 3, I've sort of combined the 3, the Dodgers, the Lakers, and the Lightning into one. And all these 3 teams have something in common. They won in bubble environments. Certainly, the MLB was a little bit truncated with with Globe Life Field and whatnot, having fans in the stands, but still the same thing applies. And I think, look, when you look at the Lakers and the Lightning, I mean, again, being able to go in the bubble for that period of time and try to win a championship, I think we don't really get, we haven't really, encapsulated the full sense of what these athletes have gone through. And we've heard some, bits and pieces. I mean, Pascal Siakam talked about it, how it was challenging to be in the bubble, how he didn't have fun in the bubble at all. So I think we've sort of undervalued, what these athletes had to go through just to get the seasons off the ground and finished. And if you look at sort of the 3 team stories, I'll go quickly here. I mean, the Tampa Bay Lightning, of course, a year ago had gotten swept by the Columbus Blue Jackets. They come back. I mean, this has been a team that's been knocking at the door. They come back and avenge that Blue Jackets defeat with a Blue Jackets series win. And you can just see that this team was just exuding confidence. And they just have so many great players top to bottom. I shout out to Barclay Goodrow, a CDS alum from Aurora, Ontario. Thanks for making us proud for once again winning a Stanley Cup, bringing the cup back to Aurora. So for them to win the cup, first time since 2004, I think is sort of a nice coronation for a team that's just been knocking the door for so long. Obviously, the Los Angeles Lakers, look, LeBron James in his second season with the Lakers. For him, and then Anthony Davis, who I think really took a step into becoming a real superstar in this league. For him and LeBron to have that 1-2 punch, it looks like LeBron once again being an ageless wonder, for him to continue to do masterful things on the basketball court, and for them to win their first championship in 10 years. And then the LA Dodgers, sort of another team again, knocking at the door. They'd been to 2 World Series, lost both of them. Clayton Kershaw, there were questions about his postseason performance, but for the Dodgers to finally, come back from 3-1 down in the NLCS, to win that in 7 games, and then overcome that crazy Game 4 against the Tampa Bay Rays, which is one of the best plays of the year, that ending. And then winning 6 games, first World Series since 1988. So I got the 3 bubble teams, the Dodgers, the Lakers, and the Lightning. It's my number 3.
I mean, you're missing one. I don't think you can really discount what Sue Bird in the Seattle
of course
in the WNBA bubble as well. And that was unbelievable what Sue Bird has done throughout her career. And like Christine Sinclair, she's inspired so many young girls to pick up basketball. And she's just been unbelievable and still dominant in her twilight years. So I think you do have to include the Seattle.
I will.
In that conversation. And they nearly got another championship as well, the city of Seattle, but they fell 3-0 to the Columbus Crew in the MLS Cup final.
Yeah, I will definitely include that. My favorite number is number 4, so let's get 4 in there with that. So congrats to all those teams. Ben, we're winding down here. What's your number 2?
Yeah, for me, number 2 is going to be every Canadian team that moved south of the border, whether that be the Vancouver Whitecaps, the Winnipeg Goldeyes in the Independent Baseball League, Toronto FC, Montreal Impact, really anybody, the Toronto Raptors, can't forget them, anybody who has had to go south of the border, not only into a bubble, but outside your own country, where things they're not as peaceful in the U.S., if you want to put it simply, as they might be in Canada. I mean, Canada certainly has issues too, but U.S. is a different story. And I think that has just taken a toll on so many people. I mean, you look at the Whitecaps, they relocated to Portland, and Portland had National Guard on the street outside the hotel. It was insane. People couldn't leave the hotel, even to go for a walk sort of thing. So I think that has really taken a toll on all the teams that have had to relocate, and all the players and all the staff and all the coaches. That really deserves some recognition, and that's why it's second on my list.
No, I mean, look, it goes back to my point about thinking of these athletes as humans, and you sort of take for granted while they're playing sports, they're these immortal figures. No, I mean, they're human beings. They have, the same, challenges, emotions that you and I do, and to say, oh, we're going to completely, relocate. I know they're making a lot of money, some of them, but some of them maybe not as much compared to the big 4. But still, it's still hard, and you can't understate the mental toll that doing this is having on athletes. And I just think that more, whether it's journalists, whether it's just the general public, I think need to just sort of pay attention to that and make a recognize that this is a reality, and you gotta give them credit for doing that to ensure that these leagues can restart and occur.
Yeah, and I mean, MLS right now is in a bit of a holding pattern because the Canadian teams really don't know what they're doing. Who knows if the border is going to be open in March when they want to start a season. So maybe we see a little Canadian division again, but maybe it's back to Portland for the Whitecaps and back to Connecticut for Toronto FC. So it's certainly still a fluid situation, but I do have to commend everybody who has made that adjustment.
So my number 2, and I could even put this in a tie for number 1, but is how sort of the anti-black racism protests spilled over and intersected with sports, and obviously this stemmed from the tragic murder of George Floyd back in May. And look, I mean, I think sports and social issues have intersected for generations. I mean, you go back to Jesse Owens, you go back to Muhammad Ali, and it's Colin Kaepernick in 2016, and it's always been there, but it's always been met with this sort of negative castigation, if you will, like, oh, sports and politics can't intersect. You gotta shut up and dribble. All this sort of negativity and real dismissal of social issues and social justice. But this was really different. I feel like, and obviously the nature of the murder was obviously, so horrific. But COVID-19 played a role. I mean, we're all in our homes, and we all had to sort of reflect on the reckoning that was occurring in terms of, racial equality and anti-black racism. And this obviously intersected in sports in numerous ways. I mean, I think back to May and June, obviously, when sports restarted, a lot of the teams kneeled during the anthem. I think back, I mentioned Naomi Osaka. We look back at the actual pause that occurred in August, and really how, again, this is just bigger than sports. And the fact of the matter is, these athletes have quite a platform, and to affect change and to raise awareness. And I think what this has taught me, and I think a lot of others, is just like the importance of being an ally and learning and having the self-awareness that black people go through, racial injustice, every day, to a degree. And so I think there was a lot of conversation this year, more so than every year. I think there were tangible change. You look at the NBA and NBPA as a result of that pause. They established a social justice coalition. They opened arenas up for voting. The hockey with the Hockey Diversity Alliance. And look, there's still a long ways to go. I don't think we're going to fully eradicate racism overnight. But I think that we really saw that, the players have a voice, and they have a very powerful voice. We saw the NFL players basically force the commissioner to apologize for his treatment of Colin Kaepernick because of a video they released related to Black Lives Matter. So that's been a big part of the year, of course. And, whenever we talk about 2020 in sports, that's certainly near the top of the list.
I think that definitely has to be near the top of the list. It was something like we've never really seen before.
Mm-hmm.
As you mentioned, we've seen it somewhat with guys like Jesse Owens, but one, that was a long time ago. Two, we haven't seen it transcend sport like it has so much this year. And I think, as you said, there's tangible change. Sure, it's disappointing that the HDA and the NHL are separate, but also it gives the HDA, the Hockey Diversity Alliance, a bit more independence, and they can call out the NHL if the NHL is not doing something right. So that didn't exist before 2020, so that's a step in the right direction, but it's still a long way away from where it needs to be.
No doubt. And I just think, again, and then a whole other conversation related to this was just, I think there's greater awareness now of the need in sports media for more diversity, like more diverse voices. It's been well known that sports media is predominantly white. I think a lot of the companies, in terms of the executive positions, a lot of them are white. And I just think that giving people of color a platform, giving them a chance to share their voice, and actually it's not just a matter of doing the right thing. It's becoming more of an economic thing now. A lot of companies, I know that The Athletic is launching a whole culture vertical in addition to their various verticals on that website. Like, it's becoming an actual economic tool to generate revenue. Like that we need to tell these stories, and so yeah, a lot certainly happened, a lot of heavy stuff, and hopefully more change to come.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully, I will move on to my number one point.
Go ahead, Ben.
And I'm still sticking with something that is a little bit of a downer. It has to do with COVID-19. Of course it does. But I also think it was a bit of a strong arm by Canada, who stepped out and boycotted the Tokyo Olympics this summer.
Yeah.
Sure, the Olympics were canceled, but before they were, Canada wasn't even going to go. They had boycotted because of COVID-19. The Canadian Olympic Committee and the Canadian government didn't see that it was going to be safe to go to these games, and they showed leadership. They were the first country to boycott these games. And Canada is not often the leader on these sort of things. It's usually the US, it's usually Great Britain. Canada wasn't the leader when they boycotted the 1980 games. That was the Americans. The games were in Moscow. But this is something different. Canada led the way in the world at the Summer Games, which is not something that they're a superpower in. Mm-hmm. Sure, Rosie McLennan will win the trampoline. Sure, you have a couple medals here and there. The women seem to be stapled to the bronze medal in soccer. But Canada led the way, and that's never happened before, where Canada has led the way in something like that in this area that they don't usually dominate. And we saw more dominant countries step out after that, follow Canada's lead, like Australia opted out days later, and then a few weeks later, the actual games were postponed until 2022. But I think that was definitely a big moment for Canada, and I think that would be the most important Canadian sports moment this year.
I can't disagree with you, Ben. I mean, I remember for the longest time saying, well, this was pre-Rudy Gobert. Like, there's just no way. Like, the Olympic Games, there's just no way they're going to get postponed, canceled, whatever. And I just think, again, it was one of those moments where when that tweet notification came up on my phone, it's like, wow, like, this isn't like the United States taking the lead. Like, this is Canada. And they certainly, forced the hand of a lot of countries and certainly the IOC to say, look, this is not safe. And I remember talking with a Paralympic athlete, a few days later after the announcement for a story, and he was just saying like how, it was tough, especially if this was a guy that, he's near the end of his career, but there's a real opportunity for rebirth at the 2021 Tokyo Olympics when it's safe to do so. And I think if we're sort of looking ahead, I think there is great optimism. And I think like you'll look back at this and say, wow, like Canada is a leader in many ways. And this is certainly one example in sports where they took the lead and made an impactful, made an impact.
It definitely is. And I mean, Canada taking the lead in the Summer Games, I think is something that sort of gets lost too. We think of Canada in the Olympics, you think Crosby the golden goal, you think of Canada and the crazy Canucks in skiing and Steve Podrobsky's medal that he won, and you think Canada snow winter games. That's usually your thinking. And Canada is always near the top of the medal charts in the winter games. So if Canada steps out of the winter games, that is a massive signal. Canada steps out of the summer games, it doesn't mean too much in the grand scheme of things. You can still put on a very high level Olympic Games, but this was the first time that Canada really put their foot down and cemented themselves as an important player in the Summer Olympic Games. And I think that was just so important to not only the current situation, but where Canada stands on the importance of amateur sport and the importance of summer amateur sport in this country.
So my top moment, and I made a little reference to it yesterday on Twitter, and that is that's Kim Ng. And Kim Ng becoming the Miami Marlins GM. And I just think that, I mean, I wanted to end it on a high note because I'm, glass half full kind of guy. But in all seriousness, I look, to have a woman be a GM of a Big Four professional sports team is massive. To have an Asian woman to boot is just remarkable. And look, I know there were articles, rightfully so, that said like that it took too long and it was well overdue, and that's a completely fair point. I mean, this is someone in Kim Ng who had won 3 World Series and she had an impressive resume, and like should have been given the the keys to the kingdom, being a GM way earlier, but you can't understate the significance of this and the fact that. You look at women in sports in 2020, you look at Sarah Fuller recently and her becoming, the first female woman in a Power 5 NCAA football game. And I just think that in general, in 2020, women aren't as hesitant to just call out the discrimination, the sexism, the misogyny in sports. And we're seeing Twitter become a real platform for that, for women in media and sports media, as well as, women athletes to do the same thing. And I just think that for Kim to be in that position, to be an executive of a team, it just inspires a future generation of women who now believe that they could be like Kim Ng. And there was a great graphic on MLB.com where there's this little girl watching on TV and they see Kim, and it's basically a metaphor of like, you can be that one day. It's not impossible. So I think women in sports certainly broke many glass ceilings in 2020. I think Kim Ng certainly one of the most significant. And I just think there's great momentum going ahead into 2020 and beyond, where we'll see women GMs, women executives in hockey, women executives in NFL and NBA. So I don't think it's too distant of a thought into the future. But you got to start somewhere, and Kim Ng being the first female GM for the Miami Marlins is my top story of 2020.
Yeah, that's a very good top story, and I do think that we'll start to see a lot more women in GM positions in the future. I mean, there's a couple names in hockey that maybe they're a little young to be GMs right now. Maybe they don't have that experience yet, like Gaming has had. But I could see them definitely taking that step within the next 20 years. And I think this next sort of 20 to 30 year period is going to see a lot of females take on a role high up in an organization. So I think that's a very important thing in the year. And it's already in hockey. It's already in European hockey with Florence Schelling with SC Bern.
Of course. And well, that concludes our top 10. And, again, just an unprecedented year. I mean, I can't believe that, when we started back, I remember 2019 there were so many moments when you think of the Raptors winning and Bianca Andreescu and so many moments, but I couldn't imagine what the year would unfold starting January 1. But Ben, I mean, are any thoughts, any parting thoughts heading into, the new year? Because I do think, like we said off the air, there is some optimism. I mean, in a lot of these topics, and the fact that a vaccine is in Canada, that the people are getting inoculated right now. I mean, it's small doses, but the rollout has begun. It's here. You gotta, say that's, back in March, to think that 9 months later we have a vaccine here is pretty impressive. And I think that's going to really decide whether or not we can go back to normal, quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about how fast that vaccine comes out and how many people are going to be able to take it. And there's definitely a strong anti-vax campaign, which is certainly worrying me. But looking ahead in sport in 2021, I really don't know what to expect. If you told me that this is what sport was going to look like in 2020, I'd have called you a liar. So I am clueless on what's going to happen in 2021. I don't have any predictions other than maybe who's going to win certain things. But as for what it looks like, are we going to see fans? Are we going to see sport in Canada cross-border sport? So it's all going to be unexpected. It's all going to be different, and I'm just here for it all.
Likewise, Ben Steiner, he is the managing editor, CEO, all of the above of 49 Sportnet. He also does great work for Alpine Canada, the Kingston Frontenacs as well. So make sure to check him out on Twitter at Ben Steiner. And Ben, a real pleasure once again to have you on the Weesports Chronicles podcast, breaking down the year in review, and happy and healthy 2021 to you.
I was very happy to join you today, and it's been a weird year in sports, so it was sort of cool to look back at it.